let Very Dark Man go and talk about one popular imam in the north. He will not be alive in the next 2 days.
They're dragging femininity with us. Like,
Who they drag femininity? Which person did that femininity?
there is Swanky, there is Style Infidel, there is Orange Ned. There's so many of them.
Wait, I don't know this. I don't know all these people where they talk about.
Yes, DJ Kopi. Personally, I feel she's not ready to get married. Yeah, because if she's really interested in getting married, there's one thing she needs to do.
It's another Monday again, and when everybody is expecting a new show, a new episode of the Honest Bunch podcast, it's all silence. That's because during this period there have been so many controversies, and because of the controversies, Nedu, who is kind of like the front man and the major spokesman of the Honest Bunch podcast, has officially resigned. So within this period, the Honest Bunch podcast is not airing anymore. But do we know if this is the end? Is this the death of the Honest Bunch podcast, or do you think the Honest Bunch podcast is just taking a break until the whole fire dies down? But how did this all start? So Nedu is known for being the guy that asks the questions that are very controversial on the Honest Bunch podcast. They have brought a lot of guests. There are a lot of things that have been said on the podcast that have been quite controversial. But while we talk about the controversial parts of the podcast, we can't overlook the good sides of the podcast, because in this same podcast, many great influential people have been brought to tell their story, to inspire and motivate others. And people like Peter Obi has been on this podcast. People like we've seen great talents on the podcast, Kanayo. We see many people that are influential, and they didn't come here and they didn't drive or ride on controversies. Well, they know the business, that the media business, the controversial part of the business is what sells the particular video they're about to push out. So they tend to do their best to bring out that most controversial spoken part of whatever they are saying on that particular episode, and that's what is pushed to the media, and that's what people see and people run with until they watch the podcast. And as a matter of fact, some people don't even watch the podcast, but run with that particular 5 seconds to 30 seconds clip that has been aired online. I didn't get to know people like Sadaboj until they came to Honest Bunch. I didn't know who they were. And there's some other people like that too that came to Honest Bunch and they said things that we didn't know who they were until Honest Bunch aired them. Like the girl talker that came and talked about male G-spot and all those things. We didn't know about all those things and those things until that girl came to the Honest Bunch podcast. Until she said it, we didn't even know who she was. So the podcast has kind of like been controversial and has promoted some controversial stuff, and it has also helped people too by giving people a voice to speak. Like we saw Olajumoke, the bread seller, coming here to tell her story. That's also helped people like that and give them a platform to speak and kind of like regain back the lost fame that they once had. So it has done good and it has done bad, but right now the bad is what is affecting the podcast, and this was bound to happen if they mess with the wrong toes, and it happened that they messed with the wrong person, VDM. So you know one thing about this media space, if you are shameless and you are willing to go to any lengths to bring people down, you will do it. VDM is not just a person that doesn't care about what he says or how he says it. It's also someone that has gained a lot of followers and get a lot of influence on this space, and because of that you have to be careful with this kind of person, because VDM is the kind of person that he will play the game with you and you can make things as messy as they can get to. Like the height of messiness, VDM is willing to go that length to just bring you down, and that's what he did with the Honest Bunch podcast. And today we see that Nedu is no longer in the podcast, and the podcast as at now is still on a break until maybe after the controversy dies down. They will now come back, and the fact that they are now having this bad image, I'm not sure the kind of people that they were begging to be on this podcast will want to come in again. People like like Funke Akindele that they have been begging to be on the podcast. I'm not sure she'll want to come there again. They have had many good people. They've had Showore, they've had Peter Obi, they've had many good people on their podcast, but there are so many more good people out there that with this new image that has kind of like happened to the brand, I don't know if they will come. But what really happened? So D1 apparently was invited to this podcast, and D1 came, and it seems that a major part of the topic was discussing VDM, and D1 made some statements of which has spawned a new drama and opened a new endless loop of different events and different controversies. He called VDM a gay guy, and he said this that he had the evidence, but the whole evidence, he has not released it. He has shown media people that have interviewed him on a radio station, on TVC. He has shown them the evidence he has, and they confirmed that he actually has legit evidence against VDM. But VDM has come out to say that he doesn't run that way, that he's a normal straight guy. So, but VDM decided that he made it his life goal to bring Nedu down. Started by calling out some people's names that are the ladies Nedula have been with, then started talking about some things that Nedula has done in the show that are shady, just to make sure that they can stir up that controversy and even take advantage of some of the invited guests that he has brought to the show. All these are rumors, and all these are the things that VDM has come out to say concerning Nedu and the podcast. And of course, all these kind of things, the more these things are being said, the more people that were in the podcasts and people that experienced some part of the podcast will come out and give their story. One of the major elders that has a good reputation, Mr. Charles Akboki, was in the podcast, and he came to share a story. Apparently, all he had to share were positive sides of the podcast. He said nothing bad happened to him, actually, or nothing controversial happened to him. So his own take on the podcast and his own experience was a positive one. But somebody that was in that podcast a few months ago or a few weeks ago has come out to say his own side of the story, and it's on the extreme end of it, which is the guy I'm going to show here today, because he just featured on Lucky Udu. I'm like, is it not too early for this guy to be on Lucky Udu? Because this guy has come to Lucky Udu and he has said things that Nedu forced him to make some statements on that podcast that he never wanted to say, and that were against his own person and his own values and morals. So for him to come out on Lucky Udu to say these things, this is going to even add a deeper dent to the image that has already been dented about the Honest Bunch podcast. So let's listen to this and let's just hear what this guy says. We'll just take a clip of what he said about his own side of the story and his experience with that Honest Bunch podcast.
Guy like this would have said something like that. Today he's here to clear the air because he was forced to say that very statement. It never truly came from him. This is his story.
It's against my character to say such a thing because poor girls don't turn me on. No. Nedu told me that he owns Honest Bunch podcast. But he said I'll have to pay a certain amount, 5 million naira. That if I really want to present this topic today, that he's giving me the option of I have to say what he tells me to say. He now said I have to mention a celebrity's name to make the thing go viral. He specifically mentioned Very Dark Man. He said I should mention Very Dark Man.
So for the fact that he saying this, that Nedu told you to mention Very Dark Man, Nedu knows that Very Dark Man is one of the hot names to mention in the media space at this point in time, and anything concerning Very Dark Man will drive discussions online. So he did it as a PR move, but apparently he actually got more than what he bargained for, because when D1 mentioned Very Dark Man, in fact, it was one that asked the question to D1 about Very Dark Man, to which D1 said what he said. So he was the one that instigated whatever thing that made D1 to say what he said in that particular podcast. And Nedu is always doing this, where he asks questions and stir up these particular discussions. So this was a strategic move from Nedu, but apparently it has come back to bite him, because now Very Dark Man has done what he wanted to do, and he has dented Nedu's image, and he has made sure that the Honest Bunch podcast is no longer as it used to be. So now more people are coming out, and this guy is saying that he planned this thing. He was like, let us orchestrate this thing, this plan, this master plan, and you mentioned VDM. So let's go.
Since the owner is telling me this, I went on the podcast and said the things Nedu asked me to say. I was so depressed, so I decided to end my life. In my lifetime, I've met manipulators, I've met narcissists, I've met gaslighters, and I've met scammers, but
what he has not met Nedu. Okay, I think this is where we will leave it. So this is what he said about the whole Nedu situation, and you can see that for everything that is happening, even if it's a rumor, there's always some truth to it. And VDM saw through the whole BS. Nedu tried denying it. VDM saw through the whole BS, and he knew that Nedu was the guy that instigated whatever conversation that brought his name out, and he went for Nedu, and he never mentioned D1. Even till today, he has refused to mention D1 or giving D1 the clout that D1 has always been looking for. It has always been Nedu. So tell me, do you think this Honest Bunch podcast can stand this particular crisis they are facing? Nedu has resigned. He really had to, because his face right now is not the one that people want to see on the podcast after going through these different phases of accusations, different phases of controversies on his own. So they had to drop him. The Glitch Studios had to drop him. But tell me, guys, what do you guys think? What do you guys really think about this whole thing? Do you think Honest Bunch podcast will survive this particular crisis, or are they long gone at this point? Let's know in the comment section. I'll go by the name East Coast Prince. This is the East Coast Show, and I'll see you on the next one. Peace.